Hello and welcome to an Around the Lens interview. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Joining me in his home graciously is Michael Edrington, the editor of Relentless Courage, Ukraine and the World at War. Michael, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today.
Glad to be here, Dave.
Glad to have you. Before we get into this, I think is an important interview talking about, of course, this important book and what it means. Can you tell me a little about yourself and your background? What have you done in your career to kind of get you to this point to be part of this book?
I have been in visual communications for more than 45 years. I came up in the military in the public affairs realm, but primarily focusing on visual communications and combat camera. It's a little convoluted in the Army. I was a career Army officer. I'd served 31 years. But photography, photojournalism has been my primary emphasis. I served in public affairs detachments. I commanded the 55th Signal Company Combat Camera. I was deputy publisher of Pacific Stars and Stripes. I commanded American Forces Network Europe. I then got out. I was the civilian director of the Defense Imagery Management Operations Center under the Defense Media Activity. I then went from there and was the senior vice president for Deluxe Entertainment out of Burbank, Hollywood, one of the largest movie post-production companies. I did that for 3 years, and then I left them and started doing freelance editorial editing and photography books and that kind of thing. And that's where I'm at.
That's excellent. What kind of got you into this particular book? Talk to me about the genesis of this book project, sort of where did it come from? Well, for our audience who's not aware of it first, tell us, what is this book about?
Relentless Courage is about the war in Ukraine. Its purpose really is to show the destruction, toll, and resilience of the Ukrainian people as it's happening now. And the genesis of this book came out of the publisher's desire to Blue Star Press to maybe make a contribution in some way to raise awareness and to show what is happening over there. And we had an opportunity in that one of the photographers were doing her retrospective. Carol Guzzi, the only journalist and photojournalist to have won four Pulitzer Prizes for her work while working with Miami Herald and her time with the Washington Post. So she was in Ukraine, and we thought maybe she could do a book, and then I got with Carol and we talked about it, and Carol didn't feel, she's one photographer shooting a very narrow area. She couldn't give it enough breadth of coverage, and she felt that there were a lot of freelancers over there and that we should open it up a little bit more. And I felt we could do that. I knew a number of them, and the publisher agreed, and we decided that we would proceed ahead and see if we could put together a package of essay photographers and tell this narrative as it's happening and maybe make a difference. And that's what I think we're succeeding. We're getting there.
No, that's great. Yeah, absolutely. We'll go into more detail about that over this course of this interview for sure.
Okay.
Well, let's go right into it then. Talk to me a little bit about the content that's in this book, right? And so you have a sensitivity content warning at the beginning of the book because of the sensitive nature of the imagery, and it is war. So many of the images do depict death. So kind of what went into the decision to obviously showcase death and destruction and whatnot, and also to put that sensitivity warning at the beginning of the book?
The sensitivity warnings in the front of the book are kind of an ode or parable to David Hume Kinnerly's powerful essay in the book, Photographing Hell, and the need for the public to see what really the gravity of war is, rather than being filtered and rather than being insulated from it.
Right.
And so we kind of put that in there to say, hey, there's graphic content in there, but it's kind of a parable to his essay.
Yeah.
And we felt that the public should see the gravity of war.
Absolutely.
But still within the context of this book, there's always a balance with that. So.
Yeah, talk to me about that balance, because obviously, you showcase dead bodies of Russian soldiers, you have dead civilians in the book. How did you kind of determine where the line was, and was there a line that you were like, okay, well, we don't want to cross and show this level of death and destruction. Was there a line that existed there, and how do you determine that?
There was. I edited through I and myself and Kate Brainerd, the designer for the book, we edited through thousands of pictures, and we saw immeasurable ugliness and atrocities committed by the Russians. And so, but you have to be sensitive to the audience as well when you're looking at that stuff, and so you. In anything that's editorial, I mean, you're publishing a book that's being sold in the public. You want the public to buy the book, so there are those considerations as well. And but for the most part, we just wanted to be a balance. We could have flooded the book. You can buy books that don't. I have a very dear friend of mine. He passed away. He used to say it doesn't pass the breakfast test. He was a director of photography for the Washington Post, Michael Edrington. Yeah. And there's that. But this is a book. It's not daily newspaper. And we could have published more graphic images of death, but we didn't want to be gratuitous about it. Similarly, we didn't want to seem like we were capitalizing. This is a horrific war. The 5 essay photographers that work with us on this book, they didn't say, they would say, this is not war, this is daily terrorism. I think Carol Guzzi actually coined the term, but we just didn't want to be gratuitous about it. The death and destruction is there. Yeah. How do we tell the story? What we wanted to show was the Ukrainian people. These are amazing people living in the middle of war. They're still living their daily lives, trying to around all this destruction, and they don't know what the next minute is going to be. Yeah. You know, a bomb, a missile, something will happen. Yeah. And it was bad. It is bad. It is bad.
What criteria went into the selection of the particular photographers? There's 5 of them that you chose specifically to give essays during the book. What criteria went into their selection and the selection of the essays they chose to write?
Well, one was easy, was Carol Guzzi. She's a personal friend. I've known her for years. We already we're working her retrospective. We'll follow this book. With Blue Star is going to do her retrospective, and she was there, and then talking to her, and then looking at the photographers that we knew were over there covering the war. And Kate was really great. She spent a great deal of time researching, saved me a lot of time, what photographers were available that we knew were over there, and then we had contacts. Kate had contacts through her work at National Geographic. And we looked for different photographers and their availability, their previous body of work and what they had covered, and somewhat their experience and experience level. You always run into photographers that are kind of trying to make their bones in a way, and you can, and there may be some really immense talent there, but you worry about who's going to be in harm's way. Yeah. And so you want to make sure that there's enough experience there that they know the right things to do and when to do them, and that's kind of critical as well. So when looking at the photographers, I looked at who was there, what their body of work was previously, what they were covering currently, and we would ask them, and then I would ask them for a selection of pictures, and they would send me what they were currently covering, and then the story would start to thread itself. We know it started last February 2022, and we were the war actually started in 2014 for all intents and purposes, but where the current conflict is, that's where we're beginning the book. So we looked at what they were covering and how were we going to thread each. What the photographers were covering kind of evolved the essays. We knew that Carol Guzzi was focusing on the babushkas, these grandmothers, that ladies of state. We knew that Paula Bronstein was covering a lot of the death stuff. We knew that Yestina Maliknowitz was covering a lot of living in the ruins, and Svet was covering kids. And we started, those are examples. There were other really great photographers like Aaron Trieb and Ken Cedino and others that we looked at, but it was how they all connected and threaded. And so we began the book with several agency type pictures, some of our own photographers that kind of built the foundation of where it began, and then these 5 essays that kind of said, this is what's going on in the middle of all this. And then as we came to the end, we come back into kind of essay, Finbar O'Reilly, and I mean, there are amazing photographers in there that aren't part of the essay per se, but they're really great photographers and could have been. But it was how we threaded the story. The bottom line was to try to give the reader an appreciation of what's really happening in Ukraine and what these people are living in and what they're going through.
Since we're talking about the particular photojournalists that were kind of selected for essays, and I know we talked about this beforehand, right? Obviously, the top 5 of the selected are all women. Now, I know there's men and women who are part of the, how many? About 20 or so?
Yeah, there's about 20.
Yeah, so about 20 or so of the photographers. Obviously, there's a mixture of men and women. And I know you said that, in selecting them, it wasn't based on gender or whatnot. It was based on a myriad factors. But I'm curious from your perspective, and being that you've seen the industry grow and change over time, is it, I say, motivating for you to know that there's so many female perspectives covering what would normally be, you wouldn't see as many, I think, female perspectives in the past covering a war. Do you think that has good for the overall career field to see that this much is being covered by female perspectives?
I think it's great. Everybody has their own lens, whether depending on what your racial background, ethnic background, your gender, it all plays into it. But for me, it wasn't quite as important as where they were and what they were covering, to be candid with you.
Yeah.
And then it came up. It came up after we came to the 5 that we were going to work with on this book, because we hadn't gotten, none of them had completed there was no completion to any of the essays. It was an ongoing thing up until the time they either left or we had to go to publication. So it was just ongoing to the last minute. So I can't say that, but we worked with them up until the point that to the last picture we could get. And I got to give each of these photojournalists a lot of credit, and I talked to them individually throughout the whole production of the book, the 7.5 months that we were putting it together. Do you want this to be seen? Do you want it to be seen as a great? They're all about advocating for women in photojournalism and having opportunities, and that's all the things that we know we should do across the board. Whether you're male or female, we want opportunity to be equitably spread, and they advocate for that. But to their credit, they all said, we want to be known as great photojournalists, not as women photojournalists. And,
right.
and we're not marketing or trying to capitalize on that. It just worked out. And these women are, and I'm doing it, but they're remarkable. They're remarkable photojournalists. They risk their lives. They put themselves in harm's way, and to pursue the story. This is what they do, and they're the best in the business. They're the best in the business. They're the best at what they do. That's it.
Absolutely. And, during my run of the show, or our roundtable show for Around the Lens, we had a lot of great guests on the program. And I was always excited to have, female photojournalists on the program because, again, I think they offer a great perspective. And I think it's very endearing and also, again, motivating to see so many, great award-winning female photojournalists out there in our career field doing the craft. And especially covering such a heavy and dangerous subject matter such as war, which again, I don't think you would have seen as many, many years ago in the past. But now it's again endearing to kind of see, like, yes, this is something that anyone can cover, and we're seeing many more women out there covering what is, I think, a very important subject matter.
Well, whether it's women, when I was on active duty and I had the 55th Combat Camera, I had women combat photographers, and I was guilty of playing into the sexism a little bit, because women are generally, you take a 200-pound man with a Nikon and a 300 2.8 lens, and a general sees him and says, "Get out of the room." And you take a 125-pound woman with a Nikon camera and a 135 millimeter lens, and he says, "Just stand over there." It's less threatening. But that's we're getting around that gradually to a degree, but that didn't play into this book so much. These are fearless people that did their job, that do it exceptionally well. They're good at their art, their craft, their profession, and they're extremely professional to deal with. And they were each heavily engaged in how their pictures were used in the book. And it was a rewarding experience. It just is. And I'm beyond now. You can look at me. I spent 31 years in the Army, retiring as a lieutenant colonel, and I look at what the person can do more than the rest of it. I really work really hard to make sure, am I looking at the work? I don't really care about the rest of it.
Absolutely, no, absolutely, and it's motivating to see. And talking about obviously these very skilled, creative folks putting themselves into dangerous situations to capture this, very harrowing and impactful imagery. Talk to me about some of these safety considerations that were taken or put in place to ensure their safety as much as you could from your level as an editor, or at least what sort of precautions did they take to ensure their own safety?
In the case of all the SA photographers, they were all on assignment or working freelance for other agencies, and so they were already there. The book idea came up after they were in country doing what they were doing, so it was a matter of reaching out and saying, "Hey, are you available and can you contribute to this project?" So that's the first thing. So fortunately, we didn't bear entirely the responsibility directly for their safety, but I will tell you this. So let me go on this, and this is what I used to tell my combat photographers. The really great photojournalists become absorbed in the viewfinder, and they are looking for the layers, and they're looking for the moment, and they're looking for the that timing and the light and everything that goes into what produces a powerful image and what conveys that story that they're trying to tell. And while they're in there, they're forgetting what's going on around here in the periphery sometimes. And I would tell each of my SA photographers, and they'll all repeat it. The camera is not a flak jacket. It's not. And you have to keep both eyes open, and you have to be aware of what's going on around you. They were all in harm's way. They've all been they had drones, and they had missiles, and they took strikes in the hotel, and they didn't get sleep at night. In one case, Svet Jacqueline, she decided to go up more toward the front with a couple of other photographers, and she got strafed and she got bombed. And then I think she got some PTSD out of it. And I remember one night I was up from about midnight till 3 in the morning talking to her on the phone. She was on a train from, I guess, Odessa. She was going to shoot an assignment, a freelance assignment. And they were shelling train stations along the way. And she was thinking, do I get off? And I said, you do not get off. You keep going. You keep moving. Do not back up. You're better off going forward than you are going back. And I was talking her through it. But she'd built up this thing. And there's a tendency I should say conflict photographers more than combat photographers. But it's a fine line. But there's a tendency to want to go to the bang bang. And war is fleeting. You can get the preparation for, you can get the aftermath, but getting the during is kind of hard, And so, but there's a tendency to want to get up there and get that. And then once you do, then you find out what the reality is, and you're not so in a hurry the next time.
Yeah. So Ambassador Oksana Makarova wrote an intro essay for the book, and again talking about, of course, a photojournalist who died in the war, which kind of prompted me to think about, of course, the safety of your photojournalists who were covering the war. Talk to me about her involvement in this book project overall, and what's she doing with the book today?
She became a key contributor to the book, and it rather evolved. I knew everyone wants, the first inclination. We're going to do a book. I wanted some essays that set the tonality of the book. I'd had that experience having done a book called Where Valor Rests, Arlington National Cemetery with National Geographic. We got a very preeminent historical writer and Washington Post correspondent, Rick Atkinson, to write that forward. And having learned from that experience, I knew that kind of set the tonality for that coffee table photo book, and I wanted to do the same thing with this book.
Yeah, and that's the book featured right here, right?
That's correct. That's this one.
Okay.
And
wow.
And then the special edition that's given to the families there with the medallion in the middle.
Yeah.
And it would set, and then having someone from Ukraine help set from their perspective what this is. And then the first course is, can we get President Zelensky? And that would take a lot of time, and he has a lot of exposure. And then there was this wonderful person, the ambassador, Ambassador Markarova, that's been on Meet the Press and several of the news shows, well-spoken, educated in the United States, holds a couple of master's degrees from universities here, and represents the Ukrainian government very well in her capacity as ambassador. And so I then wanted to how to get a hold of her, and I can go to the embassy directly in Georgetown and knock on the door or whatever, and then I could try to go through their press aid if I can find who, and you get phone numbers, and all you got were recordings and all that. And then I went out and I started using my contacts within Army Public Affairs and DINFOS and things like that. And it was your own Rivers Johnson that provided me a phone number for the defense attaché, General Kremenensky, and I figured, I can go to him. And I did, and General Kremenensky linked me into the ambassador, and then I met with her and asked her if she would write the forward, and she agreed to do that, and we went on from there, and we got what we wanted, and I think we got the best person to do it. We really did. She understands the United States. She understands the perspective. She understood the goals of the book. I want to say they had no editorial oversight whatsoever. You can't negate absolute editorial influence. There were things that we don't understand about Ukraine that you think you might, and you can't put American assumptions into that. And they raised our awareness to some of that, which would have colored the book in some ways, and we don't want to cross those lines either.
Right.
So it was very helpful. She has been immeasurably, her and her first assistant, Katerina Smugly, they were just unparalleled in their support for this project.
Yeah, isn't she handing out the book to Congress people? Is that what you told me?
Yeah, that's the intention. The publisher wanted to do something, and part of we're not raising money for the Ukrainian government or anything like that. What we did is we wanted to give the book some additional purpose, and one was, we gifted 600 copies of the book so that the ambassador would have the capacity to present. We donated, to Ukraine House here in D.C., which is their 501c3 appendage. And we donated 600 copies of the book, and the ambassador will present a copy of the book to each member of Congress that's newly seated in January.
Wow.
And part of that is to sustain awareness. This book is a fair representation. Again, we weren't gratuitous. War brings death and destruction. And we were trying to, here's a country, they are fighting. It's everything that our men and women in uniform, it's why our men and women serve, and these are people that are serving their country. Every child, man, woman, and child in this country is trying to sustain their democracy and their way of life.
Absolutely. Talk to me about the decision to include the bilingual aspect to the book. So it's both in English and Ukrainian, correct?
It is.
What went into that decision?
Well, the book is sold globally. It's a book about Ukraine, and we just made the decision that it wasn't done. It's interesting. Some might think it was kind of a trite move, but it wasn't. It was really done to show some solidarity and to show that, hey, you know, this is what it looks like, and this is about Ukraine, and we wanted to make it feel about Ukraine, and it adds that feel to it, and that's it. And then we want the Ukrainian people to have it. It's a record. It's a record. This is the first book out, you know, photo book out on the war. There will be others. There will be better ones, and I hope so. I really do.
Yeah.
I mean that because we did this remarkably quick.
I think you're saying like 7 months,
About
right?
7. It took. We started in late February, March, mid-March, and then went on, and then it came out in November. We were done about the middle of October, but it officially published in November 4th, I believe. Yeah.
Wow.
So there you go.
Okay. You know, we were talking about safety earlier, and I'm curious, were there any close calls that you heard about from, you know, any of your photojournalists who were on the ground in the Ukraine, like any, you know, potential run-ins with firefights or run-in with Russian soldier, any detainment or anything like that?
No, it was Svet Jacqueline that went to the front. I mean, Carol Guzzi had covered a zoo that had been attacked and killed a number of animals and killed a young teenage boy, and all of them had been exposed to different elements of war, and mostly it was after they were there or just before. But in the case of Svet, I think she had the most direct contact. If the others had, they hadn't mentioned it to me. But
Yeah.
they were all at risk at night. They were in a hotel in Kyiv, or they were, you know, Lviv or wherever they were. And
Yeah. You know, I know you don't want to pick your favorites, right? Like a father, you don't want to necessarily say which one was your favorite. But were there any particularly impactful photos that stuck out to you in the book that, you know, particularly resonated with you?
I think there's probably two from a graphic sense. Was Carol Guzzi's of the body bag with an eye
Yeah.
coming out of the it's a very simple, stylistic, simple photograph, but it's very poignant as it points to death and the last moment of what that man saw. And then the other one is Alex Kent's in front of St. Michael's Church. I believe it's St. Michael's or St. Andrew's. I got to remember. But there are a number of them in there. There's one I particularly like that all my photojournalists, most of them disagree with me, but I put it in the book anyway. I like the symbology of it. It's on the editor's page where I have my editor's note. It's of a Ukrainian soldier standing on a destroyed, it's a female Ukrainian soldier holding a Kalashnikov standing on a destroyed Russian tank. And the symbology of that, it just kind of lent to me that everybody is engaged in this war. And this young woman put herself in uniform to defend her country. And so it's on that page. And I like that picture. So there you go.
Yeah, I think the photo that stuck out to me the most, really just because it hit home the realities of war and how it can just, you're taking this, what was normal, you know, just normal everyday people operating in their lives, and then they were struck by war, was the photograph that showed the family that died.
On the
mother
bridge.
And I believe the two children.
Correct.
Who were trying to flee the war.
By Lindsay Adario.
Yeah, I mean, it was just such an impactful photo because it wasn't graphic or anything. It was just people on the ground, obviously deceased, but it's like, it really hit home the reality that this isn't, you know, these are people, right?
That photo ran internationally. Lindsay was actually present just right when that thing struck and then moved on. I saw the video that was done, and she was probably at risk at that time when you asked that question. She's put herself in harm's way more than once, both in Afghanistan and here. She's an amazing photojournalist. That family, the father was not affected. The father wasn't part of the group. It was a friend leading them across the bridge that was killed, but it killed the entire family. And that's what's happening in Ukraine, and it's indiscriminate. I mean, there are pictures, you asked me about graphic pictures. I mean, decapitation by automatic weapon. I mean, I could go on. It's bad. It's bad, and it's just bad.
Yeah, no, I think it really just struck home again the realities of war, right? You see it on television, it looks like from a distance, right? But I think this book and the photos in it really did a great job of just bringing it right to the forefront and making you have to confront what is actually happening over there in Ukraine right now. And it's not something that's in the past. It's not history. It's going on right now.
It's going on right now. And that was the importance of the book. I gotta say this. So, and you cut this in any way you want. Pictures are pervasive now. Everyone's a photographer. Everyone carries a camera in their pocket. And it's with the smartphone. And so you see pictures, they're fleeting. You see them on the internet. You might see them on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you're going to see it. You'll see it on the evening news at night or wherever you draw your news. And it's moments of time. Boom, 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 boom. But you don't see them in a compilation where you see it threaded together in such a way that, holy crap, this is really not good. Okay? And I remember taking this book over to FedEx Kinko's. I was meeting with the ambassador, and I was getting the first spreads printed. I needed to print the first spreads. I wanted to show her. I don't want any surprises. This is going to press, and she's in the book. And I just, out of courtesy, it wasn't for review. It was, hey, no surprises. And I remember taking it over there, and the manager of FedEx Kinko's that printed this out, she was all teared up in her eyes, and she had printed and bound this, and she said, I'd never seen this before. This is really disturbing. And I said, yes, you have. Some of these pictures you've seen before. They're with Getty, they're with the AP, they've been run in the New York Times or the Washington Post, but you've never seen them in a compilation where they're all brought together. And that's what makes it disturbing. It's not that an individual picture can't be disturbing. We know that. There are graphic moments, and they're well captured. Eddie Adams' picture of the Viet Cong guy being shot by the South Vietnamese general, and all those, and Nick Gutt's picture, Napalm Girl, and you can go on. But those are one moment. When you start putting it all together, then it's more telling. And so this is history. The book is history. And that contributes, and it's a record. It's a record of what's happened. And it's not over.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, I think, about Carol Guzzi's essay about the babushkas. Mm-hmm. Would you say that was your favorite of the 5, or what was sort of which essay most stuck out to you?
Carol has she has a very tender approach to things. She's very empathetic with what she does. She is the best at what she does in her own. Her visual aptitude is unique to her, but each of the photographers have their own unique visual aptitude. One of the most amazing photographers that I hadn't known was Yesena Maliknowicz. She's 48, lives in Poland. Her husband's from California, a mother of 2 young children, and she goes out and does conflict. And she shoots on assignment for the Wall Street Journal and others, and mainly covers Europe and like that. And she has this Cindy Sherman-esque palette to how she sees things, and a very academic approach. Academic in a good way. I mean, it's a very studied approach to what she wants to convey in her imagery, and what comes out, and how she puts it all together when you start working with her and with her body of work. She'll submit the body of work, and I'll start editing, and then Kate would get involved, and then we talk to her, and this one working against that one, and very good. Paula Bronstein is another one that is very, very considered, particularly because she's worked for Getty before, and she's worked for other agencies. She's used to the pack journalism kind of things, and trying to avoid what is everybody else getting, what can I do to show this in a unique way that the reader would otherwise take for granted, and very concerned about how that picture is going to come across. and not color it so much in her own way, but to make sure that their truth is told. And so, and we had some very intense conversations, as you can imagine. So each of the photographers brings their own lens to it, you know. I mean, they have their own visual approach, and these, again, they're the best, and they wouldn't be in the book. They each have a visual aptitude that's well developed, and know how to tell the story best their way. So
yeah, absolutely. So a majority of the book's photographs that I saw focus on the aftermath of war, right? We come at various locations after already there have been dead bodies, or there's investigations going on, or we show quieter moments that show profiles of different folks affected by the war. There's only really a few that I think, from my perspective, I could tell show like the front lines, actual fighters on the front lines fighting the war. Now, obviously, the whole country can be considered a front line because everywhere is potentially affected. But what went into the decision to mostly focus on the aftermath? Was that based on what you had available to you, or was that a conscious effort to kind of steer the book's direction in that way?
As I mentioned before, covering war, getting the immediate bang is difficult. We tried to show that it's ongoing, and we have some agency photographers that were covering that very well. Of the 5 essay photographers we selected, that really wasn't their visual direction with what they were doing. There was no, if we had gotten something that was really compelling in terms of real action photography, we might have looked at it. But then you would have only had a fleeting moment of time, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours of that. And so we tried to thread that. When we got to Dmytro Kozatsky, the young press officer with the Azov battalion of the Ukrainian National Guard, he was holed up in the Azov steelworks plant in Mariupol, and those were very poignant images that were put out, and so we elected to use a few of those, and hence his on the cover, as you can see, and he had some really graphic images in there. We did not use them all. We only used 3, I believe, total, and partly by choice and partly by where it was positionally in the book. But you make editorial decisions. People are dying, and people are getting hurt, and people and property is being destroyed, and the country is being destroyed, and that's evident in the book. And I think we showed that. I think we sufficiently showed that. We didn't have to go into gory detail. We have pictures of a Russian soldier from a destroyed helicopter pilot, and there's barely any of his bony remains remaining. We have another picture in there, I think it's by Finbar O'Reilly, I can't remember, I remember the image, but of a Ukrainian soldier standing over a Russian body. I mean, I think we did okay with that, to get the balance without. We conveyed, I feel, I'm biased because I'm the editor, but we conveyed the horror of the war without having to go into detail of the gore. The gore, I saw the gore. We could have printed gore. I would have been arguing forever. I went through 85 covers.
Wow.
And we argued over every one of them. Yeah. What should be the cover? What should be the cover? And they went from a young woman that was in a body bag to Carol Guzzi's eye on I was going to put that on the cover, and we actually got some pushback from the distributor, Penguin Random House, on that, because you also, the interesting thing, and it's not Penguin Random House's fault. That's not what I'm saying. There's also a marketing point to this. You want the public. The purpose of the book is to show the destruction, toll, and resilience of the Ukrainian people. If no one wants to look at the book, you're not going to be able to tell your story.
Yeah.
Period. Whether they buy it or someone gives it to them or whatever, I don't care.
Right.
What I care about is making a difference. This book has a purpose. It doesn't succeed in its purpose if I gross everybody out to the point that they don't want to look at it.
Yeah.
And so now you got to try to shape that balance. And so even in my editor's note, and it was absolutely true, every picture was considered. Yeah. Every single picture was considered, and how we put this together. And some will disagree, and some will, why did you do this? And why did, even my own photographers did, why did you do that one? Well, because it fit at the time. That's how it felt when we put it together. Some of it's feelings, some of it's knowledge, some of it's, I've been doing this a long time, so.
Right, I think that's probably the balance you have to make, right? Because it can't be gore for just the sake of gore, because again, it has to be justifiable and has to define what it is you want to tell. It has to fit in with your story, but also has to be something that people will actually want to pick up and read and look at. So it's like finding that right level of, okay, here's the truth of death, but also we're not going to make you spit out your Cheerios, so to speak.
What's your definition of gore? I mean, there was Paula Bronstein's picture of the people in the basement. They're two bodies laying there and the lights coming through the door, and they're laying there and they're dead. That's pretty gory stuff.
Right.
On the other hand, there's the mother that she shot from above, and there's a soldier laying in a coffin. Yeah. I mean, this war killed all of them.
Right.
And it's just at the moment, do I wait for the funeral or do I wait? There's other ways to show it. I mean, there were other. There were far worse photographs.
Yeah. No, I think it's just you don't want people to be so turned off by it that they avert their eyes to the point where they're not even, like you said, paying attention to the story. They're not wanting to pick up the book, so to speak. And I think, it goes back to another question I had, which was regard to, you have this on Amazon, you have this on Target, you have these at mainstream retailers.
It's everywhere.
So I was just curious if was there any sort of, factoring that went into that with regard to what you chose to show in the book and not show. Was there any sort of issues necessarily getting a book like this out there into those mainstream outlets?
I would say the distributor's Penguin Random House. That's who Blue Star distributes through. And they're the largest in the world for book distribution internationally. And the only consideration that their market distributors, they have marketing reps for each of the channels that they deal, whether it's they online like Amazon and Books A Million or like that, or you go to Target and Walmart, or you go to Barnes & Noble and independent. The only place that they weighed in consideration really was on the cover to some degree, but ultimately it was the publisher's decision. And the publisher, his name is Peter Lacazzi. I got to give him a lot of credit. As I said, we went through 85 different covers. I'm kind of digressing here. I wanted a graphic cover. We were going to put a vellum with that disclaimer on the front. Was originally what the design was going to be.
Yeah.
And Carol actually helped me, and Yestina, we did it by Zoom call. We went through a whole edit. We went through so many covers. I let them engage. Originally, I had a Guzzi cover, and she didn't. It's my picture, and it's not strong enough, and even to her credit, I don't want it. It doesn't deserve to be the cover. I mean, she's a pro. They're all pros. And Yestina didn't feel she had anything strong enough to warrant a cover, and I didn't disagree with that. We were reaching. And I had Dmytro all along. I had this collection of pictures. The difficulty was he was a Russian prisoner of war by that time. And now, even though he'd put his pictures out there, I could have put that young man on the cover, and now it's one thing to put it on Facebook, again, or like that, like you did. It's another thing to put it on an international book that's being distributed globally, and the Russian embassy's right down the road. And I don't want to be the causation to get somebody executed, or whatever they might have done or not done in negotiation. I presuppose what that was, but at the last minute, they let him go on a prisoner release, and the embassy gave me. I went to the embassy. I was going to say they gave me. I went to the embassy and said, "We have this picture. I would like to use it. Is there going to cause any harm to this kid?" Because he'd already released it globally online. But it was the preeminent picture that made the decision. So I could have run gore, I could have run a lot of other things, but this thing inside this, it's really a self-portrait. He found the light, and it was representative of what was going on and what the Ukrainian people are doing and trying to defend themselves. So in every consideration and selection of photographs, when you're putting together a book like this, you have to be concerned, first and foremost, is the audience, okay? Yeah. You have to be concerned about the audience. Now, the publisher and the distributors, they worry about marketing and sales and all those kinds of things, and that kind of enters into it. But from an editor's point of view, I'm thinking of the audience and what's the purpose of the book. The purpose is to show the destruction, toll, and resilience of the Ukrainian people. And are we conveying that story? And then will it make a difference? Will it have a change? The ambassador is giving a copy of this book to every member of Congress. Will our members of Congress continue to support this? This war is a tragedy. It really is. It's unprecedented in the 21st century. It should never have happened. It's as we know, and then I get into editorial opinion, but it shouldn't happen like this. This should never have happened like this. And so Ukraine's going to need support, and it's going to take more than a Marshall Plan, aka Japan, in the late 40s to rebuild. You got hundreds of years of infrastructure that have been destroyed in 9 months, 10 months, and it's going to take years and years and years to rebuild that country, and they're not going to do it alone. And so you can take that slant, and I guess that's my editorial bias. I tried to stay independent, but it's kind of hard because of my background when you know what's right.
Yeah. Speaking of bias, right? Mm-hmm. We talked about this beforehand, right? You know, you're showing only one side of the story, so to speak, with this book, right? It's from Ukraine's side. You know, not that Russia would even work with you on something like this, but, you know, taking down that theoretical road, let's say Russia had said, okay, yeah, sure, cover it from our side as well. Let's send some photojournalists and cover the Russian side. How would you interweave, or would that story even be a part of this book, or how would you interweave that story if it was part of it?
I'm not sure. I'm biased because I have some understanding. Russia wants to control its media. It wants to control what the world sees of itself. Its approach, I've read a lot from the Institute of Study of Warfare. They're online. They control their message to all. It's interesting the way they do their messaging. It's not just internal to Russia. When they write or when they put out information that they want out there, they're addressing Russians globally. They don't segment their audiences the same way as we understand it as you would understand it in the public relations field, where you're targeting. They do to a degree. I'm kind of countering myself, but they're really reaching out to all Russians in order to get support. And so now, let's say they opened it up, and I don't know how we would do that. My military background enters into it. They've lost moral authority. They've lost command and control. They've lost a lot of generals that they've pushed to the front. Their soldiers, they're operating in a leadership vacuum, and you can see it. And there's a training vacuum there. I say, you know, I've even told my own journalists and now my military side, the most dangerous thing on the battlefield is a 19-year-old private, American private, because with lack of leadership, they still know what their mission is. They know what their job is. They know what they're supposed to do. And more importantly, they know what's right. It isn't that we don't screw up and do things bad, but for the most part, we know what's right. These guys have lost all that direction. And that's why you're seeing these atrocities and rapes and murders and castrations and all kinds of crap that's coming out of this thing. And how would I cover that? I'm not sure. The answer is I'm not sure. You put a photographer in that, they capture like that, and then suddenly you're in a My Lai situation like in Vietnam. You know, the Army killed combat camera in part because of My Lai. You know, we didn't want the information out there. You know, we learn from that. You know, I mean, but I'm not sure how we would do that. I would like, I've asked that question. We discussed that. I mean, if we were really balanced, Carol said, you know, we're kind of leaning toward the Ukrainian side. You know, that's her newspaper background, and that's mine too, coming. And she's not wrong. She's absolutely right. But they're not going to let us cover them.
Yeah.
And not be a free. They don't believe in a free press. Right. So how are you going to cover them?
Yeah, that would be a challenge for sure.
Yeah,
it'd be very surprising if they were like, yeah, sure, come on over, do whatever you want, go wherever you want.
So I've gone into this whole explanation with you because I don't have an answer.
Yeah. Okay. You know, getting back to the importance of the book, right, and what you want people to take away from it, right? What is sort of the ultimate call to action that you think or would like people to take away from their viewing and reading of the book?
Well, I'm hoping people globally will understand what's happened to this country. You know, the funny thing about covering a war, it's like covering combat. I mean, you can cover the before, you can cover the aftermath. That's predominantly what you get, and the during is pretty difficult. You know, I'm hoping that we will continue. We will help global support for Ukraine. They're great people. They really are. And dealing with Ambassador Markarova, her first assistant, General Kremeninski, other people that I've dealt with in the Ukrainian embassy, and I had opportunity to meet the Ukrainian photographers I've talked to on the phone. So Slava Radininsky, he did this very preeminent picture of a Molotov cocktail being thrown. And they're just good people, and all they want is to live their life in peace and pursue their careers and raise their families and be safe and have a freedom of choice of what they want to do, rather than be a part to a geopolitical move to gain ground so we can restore the Soviet Union. You know, you come to a realization. So you bring me to the other point. You know, my next book, you know, I surmise it will be different. It will be a little bit different. This book is a call to action to support Ukraine and its reconstruction, and they're ultimately going to win. I mean, ultimately they will win. Yeah. Because we're not going to let Russia win. And it's just globally, they've lost the moral authority, and there's nothing left. There's nowhere for them to go. Right. So it's just the best end for them is what it's going to be. And then Ukraine's going to need to be rebuilt. It's just what happens next. Who does what next? That's what's scary to me.
Yeah. You know, you talked about what's next, and talk to me about what other projects you have coming up in the hopper. What else can we expect from you as an editor?
Well, the next book is Carol Guzzi's retrospective, more than 45 years of photojournalism, which is pretty preeminent. And the target of that book, more than just other photographers, is to have something out there of this preeminent photojournalist that's had a career that has set pace and set a standard by which others can aspire, and hopefully to educate and get it into universities. And it won't be a big press run, but it's a book that needs to be done, and the publisher is determined to do it. This is a new Blue Star Press. I've got to say, in full disclosure, my daughter's editorial director. They asked me to help out with these things. This is a new class of books for them within their imprint. Generally, they do fine art books. They do other books and kids' books and different things like that, and craft books. But they want to do the high quality photo kind of art book, and on a level of attention or fade on or aperture kind of book. And this is what they're touching on, and they've achieved it with this first one, and we'll do the same thing with Carol's book. Lastly, I'll say that my desire, I like to do books that have purpose, that can make a difference, aka Where Valor Rests did, and it served families of the fallen, and that's what it met its purpose, or for children of valor, for kids, and then this book is Relentless Courage. But the next book, I'm trying to contemplate something that maybe we can engage photographically to prevent something before it happens. I'm not sure how to do that yet, but I've been made aware of a couple things, and I'm just trying to cogitate and figure out how that could happen. Getting it published, I'm pretty much, I'm there. If it's compelling enough and there's a market, I can get it published. And you notice I mentioned market. There's got to be a market. There's always that component to it. There's no denying it. But I can get it published, and I can get the talent to the book. It's whether I can craft that purpose the right way, and that's going to be. And I'm being very obtuse about it, but right now that's where I'm at.
Hey, no worries. Keep your secrets. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You mentioned market, right? And
Yeah.
of course, in order for things like this to get published, there has to be a market for it. It is a business after all. Can you talk about how the book has been received via its sales and whatnot? Is it sold well?
It's selling better than most coffee table photo books.
Yeah.
Orders have been well over 4,000. The typical coffee table photo book actually sells about 500 copies. I mean, it's very low. Okay, and the average press run, I don't want to say. I think it's right around 5,000. It's very low.
Yeah.
Ours is higher than that, and much higher than that. And this is being sold globally, and it's picking. I get on Amazon like anybody else, but we go to BookScan, and it goes up and it goes down.
Right.
And we haven't. Where Valor Rests became a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
This hasn't achieved that yet, but it's a different kind of book.
Right.
It's a much different book. And when you look at market, there were all the veteran service organizations. There are 300,000 families that are represented in Arlington.
Yeah.
It's a different market.
Yeah, right.
And so when you look at market, this was a risk for the publisher to take. This wasn't so much a risk for geographic.
Right. You mentioned the book being sold globally. Is it being translated in more than just English and Ukrainian?
Right now, just English and Ukrainian, but it is being sold in Japan and all over. And I've got on Japanese on Amazon Japan, and I mean it's there.
Is the intent to translate it to more languages after this initial run?
Not right now. No,
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. We haven't even discussed that.
Yeah.
So.
Now, we'd love to dig into sort of the technical details about books, and so specifically, this book is about 206 pages. Mm-hmm. What went into that decision about book length?
Well, book length, it was relative to how we put the story. What my mandate was, it came out to 206 because that's how the press setup is, but it also, what tells the story? It wasn't, we're going to do it at 206 pages. It could have been 310 pages, but I'm just saying or it could have been fewer pages, but what told the story? And that's pretty much how we came to okay, we got to here, we're going to press. We have to add in, acknowledgement pages and things like that, and this is where we are. That's it. Yeah. But the mandate wasn't, we're cutting off at this because of a cost. It was, we're doing this is where we ended, and that's where we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was it. The publisher never said, we're only going to do this many pages. Mm-hmm. Okay, the publisher, Blue Star, I got to give he said to me, I said, I don't want to bankrupt the company. I was sensitive to that.
Yeah.
And he said, if we go bankrupt over this book, we deserve to. That was his thing. I want to do this book. And he came out of the gate, and that's it. And he put his full force behind it. And we actually pulled the cover. When we switched to the Metro cover, he pulled it on a comment I made during a conference call. I said, the picture we're using is not the strongest, but that's where we are, and we're going forward, and I understand that. And then we moved on to other subjects, and then he said, hey, I want to come back to what Mike said, and he said, I'm pulling the cover. we're going to change it now. And we'd already printed the interior of the book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that was at considerable cost. He pulled the cover, did a reprint, and off we went. And he was right. He was right.
So what was the original cover?
We had a cover of, it was apartment building in Irpin, I believe it was. It was by Carol Guzzi. It was looking through a window with all this jagged destruction out of the window and then into the destruction in the light of an apartment building. It's not in the book now. We were going to use that as a cover, and then Carol didn't feel it was the strongest one, but okay. And then the Dimitro, and then she said, "Why didn't we use the Dimitro cover?" And she was beating me up over it, and we went back, and we couldn't put it on the cover. He was still a prisoner of war, but at the last minute, it popped up, and I hit the publisher, and the publisher, I didn't say, "Hey, we should use it," but then the publisher said, "I want to use that cover," and I cleared it with the embassy that this guy would be safe. He's only 26 years old. I met him a few weeks ago. He came here, and we were off to the races. So it became the cover. It was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful cover, and I think it evokes hope in the face of adversity and destruction. Obviously, it's a war, but you get the ray of hope, as cliche as it sounds, but it is kind of encouraging a little bit, right? Like you said, Ukraine will win this war, and we'll move on past it, and hopefully this will be a history book instead of a current events book, right?
Right. And then we have, I mean, we did it, it was kind of, because it was kind of a last minute thing, but you have Paula Bronstein's picture kind of gave you the same symbology.
Okay, yeah.
But we
oh, the rainbow, yeah.
The rainbow is the last picture of the book. It's in the special edition of the book as well.
So you bookend it with hope.
We kind of bookend it. The hope here, it does evoke the hope, as you say, and your perspective is right. His intent was a little different. His intent was, this is the ray of light. I have hope, but this is of my death. Prior to my death, and that's kind of how he felt. And when he saw this, and he took advantage of it. It's a great picture. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great. Well, I think this reaches the end of our interview. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, but thank you.
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
much. No, the questions were great, and you get the background.
Indeed. Well, thank you all for watching this interview. This book, of course, is available at Amazon and Target and a whole bunch of other places. What's the website address for the book?
It's www.ukrainewarbook.com.
That's great. Yeah, and it's on shelves now. Definitely go check it out. It's a very powerful and impactful book with a lot of great stories. And I thank you so much for taking time out, Michael, to talk to me about it and coming on the program. I really appreciate it. And we hope to have you on in the future when all those other projects you mentioned come out.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right. I'm David J. Murphy. This has been an Around the Lens interview. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow, and all that jazz for all the great content that we have coming out on the channel. All right, everybody. Have a great one. See you later.